So the first sounding lead I want to throw out goes back to Syracuse, New York in 1986. I don't know what social work is back then. I'm a young guy. I'm in a history program. I'm getting a PhD in American history. I don't know what social work is. I haven't thought about social work. I'm going to be a historian. It's one of those cold Syracuse nights, and I'm all by myself. I've got the place to myself. It's a 3-bedroom graduate student apartment, but my 2 roommates have taken off. Sal decided he didn't need that PhD in psychology. He's going back to Buffalo, New York. And Doug is an architecture student. He decided he needed to have a place he could stay up all night. And so I'm there in this apartment. I'm sleeping. I'm not dreaming about anything. I'm sound asleep. The world's just jet black. All of a sudden, I'm awakened by the loudest siren I have ever heard in my life. I mean, I just bolt up from the bed, and I immediately focus on the upper left-hand corner of my room. You know how when something's going on and your brain's not really computing, and you try to localize a sound. I come up, and I'm sure that I heard a siren in my room, and it was in the left-hand corner. And I'm looking up into the corner of my room thinking, what the heck was that? My heart is pounding like a jackhammer. I'm shaking, I'm sweating. I mean, it was literally, I have never heard a siren this loud. Sure, it was from inside the room, and I wake up like, no, wait a minute, what's going on here? Was I dreaming? I wasn't dreaming. I don't remember any dreams. Was somebody playing one of those loud TVs with a hospital drama or something? It couldn't have been a TV. There's no way it could have been that loud. It's quiet now. It was just a siren. It did that pulse at the end, like you sometimes hear. And I'm shaking my head like, what in the world's going on? Somebody out in the parking lot playing jokes here at 3 a.m. And what is going on? And then I hear outside what sounds like the double doors of a van opening up. And then I hear what distinctly sounds like a gurney being pulled out of an ambulance. The wheels pop down. The gurney's being rolled across gravel. And I hear one guy say, bring it over here quick, fast. And I think, well, there must be an ambulance out in the parking lot. There's got to be something going on. I remember thinking, it's weird. I don't see any lights out there. I have these flimsy little blinds that are down, but I should have seen lights. There's an ambulance. What's going on? But there's got to be something out there. Somebody must be in trouble. So I get up. I go to blinds. I pull them up a little bit. It's silent. It's silent as can be. It's a field of snow out there to the side of the apartment. The parking lot is empty. You can see the light from the street lights reflecting off particles of ice that have formed in this cold ground. There is nothing. And I know I heard voices. I know I heard an ambulance. And I'm thinking, okay, what is going on here? I wasn't dreaming. It wasn't a television. There's nobody out there. Am I cracking up? Am I under so much stress right now that I'm going to be one of those graduate students you hear about in the university lore that just goes over the deep end because they took one too many credit hours and couldn't handle it? I mean, I was teaching 3 sessions a week in addition to my course load. I was a teaching assistant, and I started to worry. Maybe I was cracking up. Maybe there was something wrong, and the stress was getting to me. So I decided to do just kind of a cognitive check, but a budding historian's version of a cognitive assessment. I decided to give a lecture on, it just popped into my head, I'm going to give a lecture on the Compromise of 1850. There was a series of concatenated legislation back in the 1850s to try to lower the sectional stress that was leading to civil war. So I give this lecture, and I'm pulling some arcane details out. I'm thinking, my brain seems to be working okay. I don't know what just happened. Now I'm going to pretend it didn't happen. I'm going to just pretend that this whole thing didn't happen. I'm going to wake up tomorrow and go about my life, and I'm going to forget about this whole thing. But I decided first to get something to drink. So I go to the refrigerator, I open the door, and I remember this light flooding out of the refrigerator. There's nothing in there because I just eat junk food down on Marshall Street every day. I don't buy groceries, but I got a 2-liter bottle of what was called Jolt Cola. Back in the 1980s, there was this cola probably on the market for maybe a year. Its insignia was a lightning bolt. It billed itself as all the sugar and twice the caffeine. It was perfect for a graduate student. So I opened that 2-liter bottle. I swig down a couple of big gulps. I go back to sleep. I wake up the next morning thinking, that was really weird. That whole thing was probably a dream. I mean, I probably was just a vivid dream and it didn't happen. Then the phone rings. It's my dad. He says, Scott, your Uncle Eddie was killed last night. He was killed in a hit and run accident out in California. He gave me the time, and I did the calculation there 3 hours earlier. It was right at the time that I was woken up by a siren. It was right at the time when I heard what I know was an ambulance crew. And I'm thinking to myself, no, that's not what happened. I'm a materialist at this point. I don't believe that stuff can happen. I don't believe that there's this kind of connections like that. There's no way that can happen. I decide, you know what? As much as I might want to believe that my uncle and I were connected in some mysterious way at that time, it's just not possible. And so I didn't tell anybody about this experience. And as the years went by, I even convinced myself a couple years later, I convinced myself that I'd made the whole thing up after Eddie died, just to convince myself that maybe we were connected. There was a kind of fabricated memory. You see how creative the mind can be in coming up with ways to understand something that doesn't fit into the categories that we already have, right? So I'm doing a good job at that. But there was a part of me inside that knew it was real. There was a part of me that knew that I was connected to my uncle. I took that part and I buried it, but it was in there. And I would rediscover it years later when I began doing hospice work. Years later, it would become a reference point for me that would help me open to understanding these experiences in a whole new way and understanding life and my life in whole new ways. So the whole history thing didn't work out. I wasn't cut out to be a PhD in history. I got my master's. I went off and I traveled around, and long story short, I decided I wanted to work with the elderly. So I wound up in social work school. My second year, I did an internship as hospice, and I decided this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be a hospice social worker. They hired me when I graduated, and one of the first patients that I had was a fella. Well, the caregiver was a fella named Will. His wife had dementia. She was dying of Alzheimer's, but she was dying slowly. So I visited Jane and Will for probably about 6 to 8 months. I never got anything from her. Every time I'd go there, Jane would be in the bed. Her eyes would be closed. She didn't say anything. She never moved. I never got a word out of her. I never saw her eyes. She never opened her eyes the whole time I was there. But she came alive to me in the stories that Will would tell. He loved her so much. And I would go over there, every couple of weeks, and he would tell me stories about her life. He would tell me about their connection. I almost channeled her. She would come alive, and I'd ask him questions about their lives, and he'd just light up. I mean, despite the fact that she couldn't communicate in conventional ways, she was the center of his life. And he just seemed to love talking about her and talking about their life together and talking about the meaning he found in taking care of her. He even had this special garden where he'd grow like aloe and some other stuff, and these concoctions he'd make to make sure her skin was always in pristine shape, which is amazing. It's so uncommon to find that. She was the center of his life. And when she died, I was wondering how he was going to do. And so I went over to see him, and just to check in with him. I made a bereavement visit. And we're talking, and he's talking about the last couple of days of her life. And then he says, you know what? I'm so glad she kind of woke up toward the end. And I was like, what do you mean she woke up toward the end? Oh, yeah. She kind of opened her eyes and she sat up and she started talking to me. And she told me that she loved me and she appreciated all that I'd done for her. And she told me how much she really appreciated our lives together. Now, as he's talking, I can tell this is coming directly from his heart. And I can tell he means it. He believes this. Inside, my mind is saying, no way. You can't do that. Dementia destroys your brain in ways that makes that kind of interaction impossible. So in my mind, I'm doubting him. But I can see that he is serious, that he's telling me his truth. And even back then, I knew what I now know more than ever, which is that hospice social work really is about love. It's about presence. And it's about opening your heart to the person where they are and creating a safe place for them to tell you what they need and what is meaningful. So as he was talking about this, I was affirming. I was asking him questions. So what was it like for you when she was doing this? What was your first thought when all of a sudden she kind of came back online? But inside, I'm doubting it. I don't really believe that it happened objectively. I'm thinking he loved her so much that he did what I thought I did. I still haven't shaken that blueprint, right? I think he's doing what I thought I had done back in Syracuse, created this experience in his imagination because he wanted it so much. And then he says, and I'm also so glad, it helped me so much knowing she went to heaven. And I said, well, how do you know that, Will? I wasn't questioning him. I just wanted him to tell me what it was that he was thinking and feeling, where that meaning was coming from. But he said, well, because after we got done talking, she looked up, and she looked up at the sky. Her eyes were open wide, and they were sparkling. And she said, they're here. It's beautiful. I'm coming. And he was just so happy. I could tell he was serious. He was telling me the truth. And I wanted to believe him, but my doubting mind was saying that's not possible. And then he said, I'm so glad I took pictures of it. I'm so glad I got. What are you talking about? You got photographs? What are you talking about? No, I took photographs. You want to see them? I said, yeah, I want to see them. So he goes and he's looking through the table, and he's picking out these photographs. And as he's bringing these photographs back, I'm saying to myself, now, Scott, you got to respond with love. You got to respond with validation. I'm prepping myself to look at a picture, a photograph, where Jane's like this. And he's telling me how she's alive. I mean, I'm doubting him. I'm doubting him, just like I doubted myself. He shows me these photographs. Oh my God. For 2 minutes, a chill was going up and down my spine. I told you I had never seen her awake. I'd never seen her eyes. She's awake. She's sitting up. It looks like she's talking. And then he shows me the photographs right before she died, about 15 minutes before she died. And she is looking up, and her eyes are sparkling. They almost look like luminescent turquoise or something, right? I have never seen, and she's got this huge smile. This is a woman for 8 months. We'd go back and sit in her room and talk about her life, and she would not say a thing. She would not open her eyes. And all of a sudden I realized there's something going on here that I don't understand. I wish, this is before cell phones. This is back in a long time ago. And I wish we'd had cell phones back then. I would have gotten his permission to take a cell phone. I could have put it up on the screen, and you would have been as much awe as I was, I think, just to see the look in her face. And I, like, no, wait, what? And I was kind of shaken by this. This is the first time that one of those soundings pulled up stuff that I really couldn't explain, that was at odds with my worldview, that was at odds with what I believed was true about the world around us. It was consistent with what I'd been told. I hadn't gotten much training at all on near-death experiences, but the articles I read had told it was things like, you know, hypercarbia or anoxia or endorphins or, electoral activity, and you know the list. That's what I've been told by the experts who are using fancy words like hypercarbia. And if you can use words like that, it must be true, right? This did not compute. I remember kind of being a little bit disoriented for a while. And the next day, I remember talking to my friend Richard. He and I started hospice on the same day. He's a chaplain. I remember telling Richard, I had a strange experience with Will the other day. I mean, he was telling me about some experiences he had with Jane, and it's just not possible. It just can't happen. She's had dementia for years, and he says that I believe him. And that's the thing, I believe him. And Richard said, well, you got a mystery on your hands, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, and I don't like mysteries. I want to understand what's going on. He encouraged me to just accept that there's a mystery here, to be curious about it. As we were talking that day, I remember that quote from Rilke about being patient with all that is unsolved in your heart and learning to love the question. Learning to love the question so that you can one day live into an answer. So I said, well, okay, that sounds like a reasonable course of action. This is a mystery. What I thought I knew, I didn't know. And I started to remember, well, wait a minute. Remember that incident that happened with Eddie back in 1986? I started to wonder about that too. I started to open up to the possibility that maybe these articles I'd read telling me that it was nothing but delirium or buildup of carbon dioxide or DMT. Maybe there's something else to this. I had photographic evidence. I did some research, and I looked at some of the stuff on terminal lucidity when people do have that burst of energy toward the end of their life. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. There is a phenomenon where it does, very rare, where it does happen with people with dementia. It's very uncommon, but I could find something in the literature that told me that this has been observed and witnessed in people with dementia. There were theories that they were conclusive, but nothing about this whole, they're here. Who's here? What's that about? Who was she seeing? Where was she going? Had they arrived to take her away? That was Wilton's sense. And so I decided to open myself up to the mystery. And I remember saying to myself, okay, I need more data. And it's strange when you ask for data to arrive and you begin to open your mind a little bit to receiving that data, how things start to move in that direction.